the other day. That was what it was. Anyway, I'm back and ready to tell some more story here. So for those of you just tuning in, I'm currently reading my dad's manuscript. It's my first time reading it. Have not even taken a look at it, read it. So first time reading it through. As I go, I'll be making editing marks, and so there'll be a little bit of pausing here and there, aside from my ands and thes. But I hope you'll enjoy. This manuscript is called Stonecaller, and I'm currently on chapter 5. So, without further ado, just give me one moment here. Without further ado, Stonecaller, chapter 5. He woke and drifted back to sleep, repeating the process several times before he would wake up enough to wonder where he was. He knew he was on a pallet of some kind, knew that he was in a room, and sunlight was streaming in through a small window. Something moved, and he noticed there was a man beside him, dressed in a dusty gray tunic and trousers with powder blue sash. Quedrum's mind vaguely recalled that sash being a sign of one of the Gifrati healing sects. His mind was juggling memories. He was in the Carmista's palace after having been battered by the mob. No, there was something wrong with that. Here, said the healer gently. Have some water. He was where? He drank some of the offered water, though his hand shook so badly the healer had to hold his head up and hold the cup to his mouth at the same time. The water was almost cool, with a bit of sour wine in it, and he drank it down thirstily. Where am I? The healer, a muscular man with an open face, said, You're in the town of Lakvosta. There are several people here who would like to speak to you, whenever you feel up to it. Which brought back another memory. He had been standing before the wall and looking up, and nothing. The wall fell? Yes, the young face turned grim, and soldiers stormed through, slaughtering anyone they came across. Not a fine thing, save perhaps in warriors' minds. He spoke the word warriors as if it as an epithet of deepest disfavor. But you're taking care of me. My oath does not allow me to discriminate, nor does your Carmista, for all of that. Do you wish visitors? I suppose I'll have to see them sometime. Might as well be now. The first to come in was Anna Versti, Wathnaran close behind. She smiled at him. You rescued me again, Quedrum. You're adding to the debt I owe you. All of which made him very uncomfortable. I'm no hero, lady. What is a hero but one who sees a need for action at the dangerous time and carries out that action? They say you tore the wool down with your bare hands and wore yourself to rags in the process, which was near to a request for an explanation, and of course he'd already told the army his secret, such as it had been, was out. I've discovered in myself a bit of power with stones, and have been practicing it. Pulling down the wall was just about more than I could manage. So the healer said. He declared you were near worn down to skin and bones. You'll have to be my guest for a little longer. Thank you, lady. She looked at him in silence for a bit. We'll have to do something more for you than make you a simple freeholder, not to mention that your present freehold is under the rule of Batlatus. I wasn't looking for a reward, lady. You're a lying scum, Quedron. You'll take any reward you can get, he thought to himself. Of course not. All the more reason to reward you fittingly. Now we've promised the healer not to fret you unnecessarily. Wathnaran wants a private word with you, but we'll be visiting with you again later. She walked out. She is a fine young lady, isn't she? Quidrum pulled his eyes from the doorway and turned to Guathnarin. Yes. I may have been wrong about you, but she's my lady, since the time I watched her take her first steps, and I'll see no harm comes to her. And I suppose that sounds like a threat, which is unfortunate. Both the lady and I owe you, for more than just pulling down that bugger's wall. I understand the army was all in a dither when you walked in and dared them to come along. So there are more debts to be paid now. But I've seen more than one young buck come dancing in, hoping to romance the Carmista into making him great. It's never worked. She's too smart for that, and I stand behind her. No, that doesn't mean I rule through her. I carry out her orders, and sometimes even do things she doesn't know about, because it's better that someone else take the blame. What I'm telling you, in the long and roundabout fashion, is to watch your step. I'll be watching it as well. Quidrum looked up into the stern old face. You don't trust me yet, do you? You're right about that. You shouldn't trust me. And you should trust me even less if I swear great oaths about how loyal I am. I'll just say that she's my lady for so long as she'll have me around. It made him feel better, somehow, that Guathnarin still looked at him distrustfully, then nodded. Without another word, the old commander strode out the door. Quidrum felt a little better, knowing there's someone else looking out for the lady's interests. His next visitor was a grim-faced phalanx commander. So you did everything just as you said you would, and we did our part. Now, can you take these confounded stones off my shoulders? Do you have any idea how hard it is to explain them? Quidrum swallowed his laughter, knowing full well that such men made bad enemies. He called the stones away, noticing a trace of slowness in their response. Pulling down that wall had certainly left its effect on him. Would he be able to build his ability back up again? He half wished for Shepard Kalish to show up and explain it to him. He was relieved to find that, as his physical strength returned, his ability with the stones recovered. It did not recover quite so quickly as his physical strength, but as he continued to practice with the stones, it came back bit by bit. Now that his secret was known, and known so widely, there was no longer any point in exercising in secret. This brought another result. He heard from other sources that some people thought he was showing off. He took to practicing secretly again, but no longer made quite such an effort to remain hidden. After another week with the healers, they declared him sufficiently well to be put out of his bed to make room for someone who actually needs it. They had arranged quarters for him in the palace, though Lord Hameltika's home was nowhere near to the Carmista's palace in style or size. Quidrum was well fed and clothed, though he saw Anniversary only from a distance. He was privy to most of the rumors, and the rumor was, with most persistence, said that Latos was headed up to Lakvosta to deal with him. The stories differed in details. He had 1,000 of those invincible soldiers. He only had 20 left. He would arrive in 2 days, in 2 weeks, in 2 months. Then, one day, a page came to summon Quidrum. The Lady Anniversary and Lord Guathnarin wish you to be present for their council, sir. Me? Why on earth do they want me? This threw the page into a fluster. He was used to delivering messages, not discussing the reasons behind the messages. Sir, they didn't tell me that. They just request your presence. And Quidrum, realizing the truth of this, said, I'll be there, thank you. He mused himself as he went along the corridors. This was not likely some reward for saving the Carmista twice, but more like a summons because no one really understood his ability with the stones, and they probably hoped he'd be able to use that power in her service. Could he? Well, most of his notions had been on the lines of making money, betting that he could do this or that with stones. Pulling down the wall had been a desperate act. He wouldn't be able to do the same thing again soon, not without killing himself. It seemed the answer to the question of what he could do for the Carmista with his ability was, I don't know. They didn't ask that question straight off, though. Wathnaran announced the first order of business. News about the military situation. Batlas is coming this way, at least. There's a story about a large stone knocking him off his horse during the battle, and he's had difficulty riding since. However, he has entrusted his army to a commander by the name of Losibalson. Losibalson, and ordered Losibalson to come up and deal with us. We have a little good fortune. He has trusted Losibalson with only 200 of those invisible troops. Likely for fear Losibalson might turn against him. On the other hand, we have a small force, daily getting smaller. The long retreat was wearing, and men have been slipping off because they see us as a lost cause. We might attempt to fight Losibalson, but I dislike the thought. Unless we have a superior position. Lakvosta is minimally so. A siege is possible, stripping the countryside bare. But how long could we hold out? Myself, I favor pulling back deeper into the hills and harassing their advance, the same way they harassed our retreat. There we will regroup and work toward reconquering the Karmelstadt. I am willing to listen to other plans. It seemed to Quedrum that while he was willing to listen to other plans, he was equally willing to dismiss them once heard. The phalanx commander spoke up. How do we feed an army back in the hills? Guathanera nodded. A good point. We will be dismissing the bulk of the army before we go. Part of our work in the hills will be to gather as much in the way of supplies as we are able, so that the next campaigning season will be able to support an army, at least for long enough to win a victory. If Batlas leaves us alone to survive, let alone gather supplies. Quedrum thought the phalanx commander was speaking a little more boldly than was safe, but there seemed to be a bond of sort between him and Guathnaran. Batlas has difficulties of his own. His army was badly battered too, and he has little time left for campaigning this year. I feel sure that we can depend on being left alone for most of the winter. You've made all the decisions then? Barring some unusual circumstance? Yes. I see our Master of Stones is with us. Is that not an unusual circumstance? And did the two of you work that bit of talk between yourselves? Quedrum wondered. It might be, Wathnaran answered. But I know altogether too little of Quedrum and his abilities. Quedrum, what can you do for us? Quedrum stood, gathering his thoughts. He did not want to seem unhelpful, but neither did he want to make rash promises he might be unable to fulfill. The best answer to that, Lord, is, I don't know. I've only recently discovered this ability of mine, and it grows with practice. Furthermore, pulling down that section of wall left me unconscious and weak. I'm only gradually recovering the powers I had. I can do a few things with small stones, but as for larger tasks, not yet. I really don't know enough about this gift yet. Will I ever be able to do some task as large as pulling down a wall without collapsing afterward? Perhaps. When would that be? I have no idea. Am I willing to put myself at your disposal? Yes, with one condition. If you ask me to do something that I think may kill me, I may refuse. Wathnaran's scowl said clearly that he didn't like conditions on obedience. But there weren't great bands of people possessing power over stones, so executing Quedrum as an example would not be a useful notion either. Then Anavristi laid a hand on Guathnaran's forearm. Go easy, my old friend. He has an ability. He's willing to use it for us. If he uses it to the extent that it kills him, then we will no longer have his ability to depend on. You won't fault him for that. Guathnaran turned to look at her, and Quedrum knew his thoughts. You don't know what I... You don't know what I know about him. No, she doesn't. And that's just fine. If she did know, I wouldn't be allowed this close. Revelations of that sort didn't belong in this sort of council, so Gwathnaran went on matters of available food stores. Quedrum found it tedious business. Food came, food went. If it was short, you worked out a game to get the money you needed to buy for it. If it got too short, the place you were at, you went off somewhere else. Even he could see the matter was not that simple when you were trying to feed an army, even a small army, so he tried to pay attention. Still, he was glad when the break came. A page, either the same one who had fetched him, or one who looked similar, slipped in the door and walked up to speak quietly to Gwathnaran. Gwathnaran nodded to the page and then went up to the group, looked up to the group and said, "It appears we have a visitor, a Thard wizard." This brought a sudden silence to the group, and then a buzzing of conversation. Quedrum considered what he knew about Thard wizards. The popular tales said they were intent on spreading their own philosophy. He had heard it best described as either natural justice or the greatest good for the greatest numbers. Kings and rulers tended to dislike them. Thard wizards seemed to be against arbitrary use of force, against crushing people by heavy taxation, and so on. On the other hand, it seemed to take a great deal to force the Thard wizard to use his magic, save in self-defense. Nor indeed were they all powerful. People told more than one story of a Thard wizard in this place or that, killed by a more powerful magician, or even by a dagger in the back from an unexpected assailant. Quedrum doubted the supposed lack of self-interest. Everyone had some self-interest. Everyone is out for themselves. Of course a person might put themselves at the disposal of someone whose interests were not their own. Even that seldom lasted long. Then the wizard came in. He wore the usual brown robes of the Thard wizard, the usual flat fur hat. Other than that, there was not much really wizardly about him. He was short, stocky, heavy built, and the hands protruding from the sleeves of his robe were more like those of a laborer. The right hand grasping the staff was in clear sight, allowing Quedrum to notice the tiny scars on his knuckles, the scars of a brawler. Furthermore, on his right cheek was a scar that indicated a close acquaintanceship with a dagger point. He walked up and bowed to the Carmista and Gwathnaran. "My name is Casibanio, and, as you will have heard, I am a Thard wizard." He smiled. "Many of you will certainly be doubting my qualifications. I will not give you any great and fearsome threatening signs, only a little one. No threat at all. Sahare!" At this word, a small purple flame appeared on his palm. It leapt off his hand, dividing itself into many as it went, each of which danced in front of a single member of the council. Quedrum had a chance to see one of the flames leap up close. There was no sign of what was burning, indeed. There was no heat at all, just a small purple flame flickering in front of him. He spoke again. "Isha!" The flames disappeared, as if they had never been. He looked around at the gathering. "I hope I have disposed of all questions regarding my being a wizard. If any more definitive sign is required, I might provide it later. At the moment, let me say merely that I am here to give advice and counsel." "And your advice?" Gwathnaran was scowling. "First, let me explain. I do not make bargains. I offer to help the person who seems most likely to appreciate my work and make suggestions. After you have come to power, you may need invite me to leave, but I can hope that you will carry out my suggestions." Gwathnaran's face twisted sardonically. "We should believe you will be so accommodating." Casibanio smiled. "Consider this. If I require a certain concession of you for my aid, but after I have aided you, you decide the concession is too great, you will then refuse the concession, leaving me with no choice but wreaking some horrid vengeance on you or fleeing away, a failure. You might even make an attempt on my life, fearing lest I wreak that horrid vengeance. It is much better if I merely depend on your honor and gratitude, with no threats from either side. This sounds extremely fuzzy-minded and idealistic. You help us for nothing but a promise to consider your conditions afterward? No one does that sort of thing. I do, Lord, answered Cassibano mildly, and I do so because I know regarding you and the Carmista you serve and I do so because what I know you and the Carmista you serve leads me to believe you will show your gratitude after. There are some, one might even say most, rulers whom I know it would be futile to approach thus. I am not a complete naif, Lord. And a little flattery won't hurt, of course. Wagner smiled sardonically. Very well. What are these conditions we are to consider? Cassibano smiled. A simple one, really. You should choose a council to advise you. The council would give advice, but you would not necessarily be bound to accept that advice. And further, common people would be allowed to put their grievances to this council, which would in turn these to you or such of the grievances as the council considered to have any merit. There is a rumor, Wagner said, that you Thard wizards are intent on overturning society. That seems to be the case. The wizard smiled gently. No, we do not look to overturn society. A society overturned turns into a chaos, with everyone struggling to better his lot. At the end, such a society usually finds itself being ruled by the strongest and most ruthless. I do not claim that this change I ask for will have no effect on your society. It will. The changes, however, are those my order considers to be desirable. Indeed. And if a neighbor who happens to be one of those strong and ruthless men decides to add us to his dominions, we might be conquered while the council was trying to make up its mind whether or not there was actually a threat. Cassibano shook his head. I hope we are not that foolish. No, the Carmista still rules. She makes the decisions, and if it comes to be a case where a decision needs to be made instantly, she will still do so. It might even be that I or one of my order will stay in the Carmostat to continue to give advice regarding such things as neighboring rulers who might have designs on her land. At this point, Lady Anniversary took over. Lord Wagner, I think that we can use any help offered to us right now, and the cost, it seems to me, is not extreme. And as to upsetting society, I believe Batlas has done that already, so far as our people are concerned. Cassibano, I agree to your request. What advice can you give us? Thank you, lady. My first advice is that you should take care. I believe the Carmostat of Dara has been showing himself as mediocre at best in regards to magic. The better to take his armies unaware when they begin to feel safe. Those invulnerable warriors of his? A fair example. Cassibano gave a small bow to the Carmista. So far as I can determine, he has not intentionally built any of them to fail. He has, however, rushed through the building process so that as many as a third of them will break down in battle. But there will be a certain corps who will be partially invulnerable. A commander might see them on the battlefield and know them for tough spiders, but remember seeing them smashed on other fields, so he may make allowances. Augment his line where it faced them, and go to battle only to find that they smashed through his formation with little loss. There is silence in the room. The phalanx commander stood. You tell us this, and it is useful to know. But can you do something really useful, such as dealing with these fellows yourself? A fair question. The simple answer is, not at present. I shall have to do some research, look into the methods used to make them, and then try to find a method that would best counter them, seeking out the one likely to work best. Why not make some for us, without the vulnerability? Ah, straight to the point, as befits a soldier. But though I do not know the exact method Batless is using, I do know that most making of such things involve mixing of blood of men with clay while speaking certain spells, and the blood must be that of a freshly slain men slain within moments just before mixing. Now, it just might be possible that in the last extremity your Carmista might countenance such work, but I will not cast such spells for you, he paused. Or anyone, for that matter. Gwathnarin was scowling fiercely now. How long till you are ready to deal with them, then? Casabanyo's brows rose. How long is a rope? How high is up? How far is down? Some questions cannot be answered until one has more knowledge. 6 weeks, 6 months, several years. I'm sorry, I will do my best for you, but any answer I attempt to give your question this moment is bound to be wrong. So we retreat into the hills with these invulnerable men coming after us until they finally corner us and destroy whatever's left of us? The situation need not be so grave, Lord. In a few weeks, the winter rains will render taking an army into the hills near impossible. And even the invulnerable soldiers cannot be everywhere on any battlefield. If you move your troops to where they aren't, you can do a great deal of damage. I see, said Gwathnarin and smiled with a little mirth. A fine state when I must take lessons in basic tactics from a wizard, no matter how wise. He looked around. So near as I can determine, the decision of this meeting has been taken. We will withdraw into the hills. I believe we must leave at least some garrison here in Loch Bosta, if only to give a little more delay to Lossabelson. The next few days involved a lot of rushing around, getting what supplies were readily available in the locality, paying off the soldiers who were to be sent home, and setting up a garrison for the town. He must take a cold mind, Quedrum reflected to himself, to order men to a place where he knows they're going to die. Not just have a hard fight of it, but die defending the city just to give the important people time enough to get away. And what of the men themselves? Some of the least ignorant must surely know what's coming, and yet they stay. They don't sneak off somewhere. He felt a smile come to his face. You're not sneaking somewhere safe either, Quedrum. You're heading off into the hills with the rest of them and hoping winter weather will keep Lossabelson from falling all the way. In the midst of all the hustle, Quedrum saw Casabanyo approaching. No, the wizard wasn't heading off on some unknown errand. He was coming for Quedrum himself. I'd like to have a word with you, young Quedrum. Regarding what? Bird songs and blueberries, of course. Come on, there's a wine shop here where we can talk in more comfort. Since he couldn't think of any good reason to avoid talking to the Thard wizard, Quedrum followed. During the evening, darkness would have covered most of the faults of the Blackbush. Even minimal light made its way into the place during the daylight hours, revealed its dingy, gray, and greasy smelling of old smoke, old food, and stale bodies. The wine, though watered strongly, was not unpalatable. Better still, the wizard paid for them both. Now then, Quedrum, tell me how you come by this power over stones. Part of him wanted to tell the fellow to mind his own business, but the basic secret that he had the power was out. Quedrum found himself telling the story, a version of the story at any rate, leaving out Shapakalish, simply making it a matter of finding out what he could do with his special stones and going from there. He also left out his games, and the stone he'd thrown on the battlefield to knock Ladis out of the saddle. He finished up with the tearing down of the town wall and what it had cost him. The wizard smiled, though the smile did not seem to make him look that much more friendly. A more complete version than I could get from anyone else, at any rate. I'm sure there are other things you can tell me, but never mind. So, have you decided to throw in your lot with the lady, have you? So you've decided to throw in the lot with the lady, have you? That last question, a sudden shift of direction which caught Quedrum unprepared, brought out the answer before he could think through any positive or negative implications. Yes, I have. The next question should have been why, and Quedrum was rapidly preparing a response to that. But the third wizard merely nodded and went into a long inquisition over the earliest time he could remember knowing his ability with special stones. When I was a boy, very little, I found out that with certain stones I could always hit difficult targets. I couldn't tell which stones would work except by touching them, nor could I describe the way they felt. They just felt right, if you understand that. Casabagno nodded. I believe I can understand. And before you ask, I have no power over stones myself. I have, however, some understanding of such gifts in general. Quedrum continued. So, of course, I took to making sure I always had a lot of special stones with me. And after a bit you discovered you could do other things with these stones as well? That's right. He wasn't going to get into the whole affair with Shapa Kalish, even if he ended up impolitely refusing to answer questions. The third wizard seemed content with Quedrum's terseness, and from there you extended your ability to other stones. Yes. And you're on our side, are you? Been talking to the noble Lord Gwathnoran, have you? No, ought to I have been? Well, the two of you could have a fine time sharing suspicions. I near killed myself pulling down a wall to help rescue the lady. Does that ease your mind at all? I had known that already, of course. It's just that I felt the need to talk to the one who had such powers, if only to satisfy my curiosity. Now, tell me truly, what do you think of the lady's chances of success? Me? Quedrum, the disreputable slinger? You want an opinion from such as I? If you doubt the chances of success, why are you here at all? Too many questions. I suppose I answer the last first. Yes, there are chances of success, but there are a number of factors involved, and I will answer all of the questions in one. You are part of the ladies' party, and possibly more important than you think. I wish to know how all of our people feel about your chances, nor are you the first I've asked. Now, I have given you several answers. Will you favor me with one? There was good humor in his voice as he spoke. Quedrum nodded. The answer is, I don't know. And before you ask me why are you here then, the answer to that one is, the lady seems to have too many people against her, and so I'm going to be for her. He realized then that this was the truth. Not only that, it was opposed to his attitudes. His former attitudes, rather. What were his present attitudes? That was too deep a thought for him to consider long. Casabagno smiled at him, sympathetically this time. So, well, your help will be well received, Quedrum. At that moment, someone came to the table. Both of them looked up, ready to dismiss an interloper. But Quedrum recognized him. Thaldo, what are you doing here? Thaldo, you're here? It was indeed the young farmer, recognizable despite his light infantry kit. Oh yes, I managed to get along, and in being a seasoned veteran by now, I have ways of dodging fatigues and the like. I hear you've come up in the world, smashing down fortresses and all. Just did a bit of this and a bit of that, Quedrum said, feeling embarrassment creep over him. Sit down. I can buy you a cup of wine for old time's sake. Casabagno, this is my friend Thaldo, the first friend I met in Higford. Thaldo, this is Casabagno, the third wizard who's come to help the lady. Casabagno seemed to have little disinclination to share a table with a mere light infantryman. And what do you think of the lady's chances? He asked Thaldo. Well, smash them, of course. The smiling blue eyes fixed on him. And now that you've told me what you've told everyone, what do you think yourself? Thaldo took a sip of wine. I think we've got our work cut out for us. Those more Korean pottery men of Batlas? That's what they're made of, you know. Pottery. They're bloody hard to kill. If you had a whole army of them, I doubt anyone could stand up to them. We're doomed, then? Didn't say that. I thought we were doomed. If I thought we were doomed, I'd have lit out long ago. And we've got Quedrum. Casabano looked at Quedrum, who was smiling even more broadly. Well, young Quedrum, you seem to become the army's hope. Can you live up to that? Old woman's apron. I can move stones around, that's all. I don't think I'm anybody's hope. Baldo chuckled. You looking for somebody to bet against you? Quedrum drew a deep breath, but held back his immediate retort. After all, that had been him, back when he first arrived in the country. He was out for himself, like everyone else. He pushed up a smile. Maybe I'd best bet Latus to bet against me. Lay his karma stat on how many stones I can balance on my finger. He recalled Guethnarin having said something similar. I don't know about being anyone's great hope, but I put myself at the lady's disposal. If I or anyone can figure out a good way to use my powers, I'll do it. Then he grinned at Baldo. You can bet on that. Bet you a cup of wine at an old copper bowl back in Higford you can't do it. He was grinning too. Quedrum shook his head. Too low. Say 2 cups and you're on. 2 it is then. He turned to Casabano. You be the witness to the wager, of course? Despite the good humor that Thard had shown hitherto, Quedrum was quite sure such foolishness would rate a frown of annoyance, at the least. His smile only broadened. Of course. Baldo swallowed the last of his wine and stood. One thing we seasoned veterans know is when not to push our luck. I've got to get back to before 10-liter Ned Salson notices I'm gone, or he'll have my guts for a waist belt. He was gone. And that is the end of the chapter. So thank you for tuning in. I'll be back again really soon with the next chapter. So I'll talk to you again. See you all tomorrow.